It is a super exciting day today. We get the Total War Saga Troy drop today. We're going to go through the trailer. We're going to go through the campaign trailer. We're going to go through the FAQ. We're going to go through a whole new pair of pants. So let's have some fun. Let's start this trailer. And we'll do the typical kind of thing. We'll just stop it, talk about some stuff. There's not like a rich, well, there is a rich lore. So it immediately starts off with Achilles burning Patroclus. And the way that this works is that Patroclus stole Achilles' armor. Achilles was, I think it was like 3 or 4 days on the beaches while the Aegean, I can't remember if this is considered the Aegean League, but either the city-states of Greece waged war throughout the walls or against the walls of Troy to no avail for the most part. And multiple times they had come to Achilles and said, ride out with us. And Achilles was, taking a hard stand against Agamemnon. He did not like Agamemnon. So Patroclus stole his armor and tried to rally everyone, including Achilles' Myrmidons, to the fight. And what ended up happening was that Hector killed Patroclus. And this actually is what sent Achilles into a rage. Now, there are a lot of ways that this story goes. For the most part, Achilles goes on to fight the mighty Hector in what is a very famous duel of really the Trojan War as a whole. So let's go on and see little bits of that here. Brad Pitt looking great in his gold refinery here.
Doomed.
Oh, damn, this is so cool. Age of Mythology, Total War. I think Jackie Fish made that joke on Twitter. So here's something interesting to kind of note, and this is something we'll talk a little bit more about. But if you look at this, and this is interesting to see, is these blocks of infantry, is that there was no formulated fighting to this time. You had hoplites, which they derived their name from their weaponry and their finery. But on top of it, it was more of a skirmish style battle. You did have ranks of archers. But for the most part you had infantry of varying classes, but there was not a wide use of cavalry at the time. Horses were not bred for warfare and thus could not deal with the cumbersome weight of a fully armored warrior as you see throughout history. In addition to that, like I said, it's skirmisher style play. So when these two armies meet, you're not seeing the typical phalanx formations of what you see from the Hellenistic period, or at least more prevalent in the Hellenistic period. The Hellenic era is really rife with a lot of change throughout the way that the Greek city-states enacted war. So taking a look at this, we kind of see this skirmisher fighting around everywhere, but also it's kind of the fray of combat at the same time. Oh, and Troy was known for having these huge, massively thick walls. And we have Hector, probably the closest thing that Troy can really field to an Achilles. And Hector is this very passionate, he's an overly romanticized character in the Iliad. And he has this big, long horse tail mane thing here going on. He's an Apollonian. And that is in and of itself, he's pretty much like the prime general of Troy. Him and his lovely brother Paris, who I just absolutely hate throughout the entire Trojan War saga. You get this grand duel of these two titans, as it were. These are pretty much the linchpins of the leadership of both factions when it comes to Trojans or Aegean or Greek at the time. I don't know why they call it like a whatever it is. As we jump into the campaign, you'll see they kind of pronounce it funky. But this is hugely exciting. We're going to go through the FAQ in just a little bit here. Well, let's jump on over across the way. Look at this awesome... hey, Brian Blessed. You can see this badass key art that they've got too, with Hector over here, the Apollonian tail on his head, and Achilles over here, looking super cool. Now, this is the little campaign flyover.
16.
Lower this a little bit too. And we get our first little vestiges or little previews of this map, and it looks gorgeous. So the big question here is, and this is before we jump into that, I really enjoy this stylistic use of kind of creating that like a boundary or a border around this around the territory that you obviously cannot go across, right? You can take a look here. You're not going to be able to go beyond this point probably, but I really like how they've taken like the style of Greek pottery or Greek vase work and use that as the backdrop for the sky. I think it's really cool and really overly stylistic, and I really like it. It's something that was kind of lacking in some of the other Total Wars. I really enjoy the stylistic approach that you get from Rome 2. But it kind of just chronicles the overview of what happens here.
As they sail away, Helen's husband, King Menelaus, curses her name.
So we... if we read the FAQ, it says that there's 8 heroes of the era included. So there's one, Menelaus.
King Agamemnon.
King Agamemnon, probably number 2. One thing to note too is take a look at these cities. They don't look any different. And I'm assuming this is just like, hey, we're pretty early in the development of stuff. Here's our cities. And remember, this is a time when Greek city-states, each one is separate in its own single governing body. You did have Agamemnon as a pretty strong powerhouse in Greece at the time, but for the most part, these guys were pretty independent. They had their own kings, and they were their own kings, and they had their own kingdoms. So it should be interesting to see how these factions kind of roll out. Ooh, look at that helmet. That has got horns on it.
Among them, swift-footed Achilles.
And then we get, of course, the mighty Achilles in gold and Odysseus the archer here. So hopefully Sean Bean makes a reappearance here in this little ditty. That covers 4 of our heroes, and we know we're getting Hector. I mean, because Hector's, we just saw him, and probably we're going to get Paris. Unfortunately, Paris would be the archer over on the Trojan side. That does leave 2 more slots. And I'd love to hear what you guys think for what those slots might be. What are the other heroes that might pop up in this game? I mean, my money would be on Ajax. He's probably like my favorite character of this era. But I love this too, like how you get to see Mount Olympus. Hear this harsh crackling thunder. So sick. So I am very excited. I mean, I woke up, I watched all this trailer, and I started making this video. So I'm sorry if I sound a little discombobulated, maybe a little nasally, but this had to be done. I'm so goddamn excited. This is probably one of my favorite eras. And here's one thing I was bringing up though about those cities. This doesn't look anything special or unique for it being Troy. So I'm wondering if these are just holdovers, or if really they're just trying to put an emphasis on, okay, there's going to be the city here. Then that's when you'll see a big different actual battle map. I'm hoping that these cities don't have generic siege maps or anything like that. Each one is individualistic, or at least Troy in and of itself is frighteningly individualistic. That's what I really want. So when we take a look at this FAQ, we're going to see exactly what all this means, right? Troy, a Total War saga. We've seen some saga games before. The saga game before this in Total War Britannia. So when we take a look at this, we are noticing that we're going to get that little snapshot that they've talked about, how we're looking at the 20-year war of the Trojan War. So in my mind, I think that kind of limits our overall, I guess, maybe variety of factions. In Troy, the fate of the Aegean civilization will be in your hands. Each choice you make will shape the lands from the mythical heights of Mount Olympus to the arid deserts of Lemnos. So this is, again, a pretty crazy time in history. You don't have a lot of the really big things that are the huge driving factors for other Total War games. As mentioned, this is the earliest Total War to date. So with that, you're getting a much different system, and it talks about this. So rather without getting ahead of myself, this kind of goes through what a Total War saga is. This is pretty much going to take that, again, small snapshot of history, as they call an intense flashpoint of history, And they're just going to be focusing and drilling down on that rather than an overarching couple of centuries or the overall development of a whole entire continent. Why did we choose Troy? This one I think kind of speckled on, but really the main thing here is that it is a pretty mysterious point in history. And I will be honest, this is the one thing I'm not too excited about. And I think it's something that is done a little too much lately. Truth behind the myth. If any of you guys saw that not really great movie, Hercules with The Rock, or any of the recent movies that are kind of steeped in this era where they try to take the truth from the myth, I don't think anyone really wants that. I want the myth. I want a 15-headed Hydra coming my way. I don't really want the Hydra could possibly have been this rare type of gecko. Like, I don't want that. Just fucking give me the crazy shit that no one thinks existed. That's what I want. I know that, like, this is a really cool and interesting take on this era, but for what you're doing, just go ham. Give me the whole nine. At the same time, you could argue then that why don't you just play a Troy mod for Warhammer 2? So I see where Total War is going with this. They are historically a historical title-based series. And with Warhammer 1 and 2 and eventually 3, this is their first foray into fantasy. And Troy kind of seamlessly blends that transition from fantasy and quote-unquote historical by taking a very heavy mythological step forward. So I understand the need to want to take a more truth behind the myth approach to things. And with this not being like some overproduced Hollywood schlop movie, I can only hope that it will be done to proper execution. They haven't disappointed me so far. So why did you decide upon the truth behind the myth approach? The events surrounding the Trojan War are steeped in legend with tales of mythological creatures, superhuman heroes, and the intervention of gods, all vibrant with their cataclysmic conflict. However, little is precisely known about the real-world events that occurred during the late Bronze Age, with many of its kings, queens, and artifacts lost to the annals of history. So it does kind of go into express that they're using, stuff like the Homer's Iliad as a source, archaeological recordings as sources, so on and so forth, so on and so forth. So try and merge these two. So we go on to talk a little bit now about the gods and what their overall play is in the campaign. And it seems very awesome, right? You can dedicate things to gods from what it sounds like. You get different bonuses depending on the gods. When it talks about naval battles, it talks about, okay, do you have a lot of bonuses to Poseidon? Well, then you're going to get a lot of bonuses in any of the quote-unquote naval battles. Now, we'll talk a little bit about the engine too when we get to naval battles, but I have heard from Creative Assembly themselves that this is Total War Warhammer 2's engine, not Three Kingdoms. And that makes a lot of sense. When you take a look at Total War Britannia, that was based off of Attila's engine, which was the previous engine that they used before Total War Warhammer 1. If we look at the fact that Total War Warhammer 1 came out, and then 2 came out, obviously. But Britannia came out in between that. Oh, shit. I can't remember if Britannia came right after 2. But either way, you can tell that a game's development is not going to be that quick that they're going to be able to use the newest engine. So this will obviously be on Total War Warhammer 2, and which I'm so stoked on because we have individual hero units and lord units into. In addition, we also get big mythological creatures. So it's going to lend itself so nicely to the way that Troy should hopefully play out. Especially with the intervention of gods, who knows what that could overall lead to. After all, the more fervently a leader devotes themselves to a deity, the more likely their people are to espouse and live those beliefs. So you can really shape your overall culture depending on which god of the pantheon you choose from. You'll probably see the kind of main ones, right? We'll see like Zeus, like Hephaestus, Poseidon, Hades, probably not Persephone, but just the main gods and goddesses of the pantheon that'll really probably make up a certain core of them. We're not going to probably get off the deep end into demigods or like the very distant like fringe gods. Like Apollo, I would see, and all the other awesome gods that are a huge part of the massive portion of Total War mythology. Will there be any mythical creatures? Now, our truth behind the myth approach has allowed us to draw from a multitude of mythology's most renowned monsters and include them within the battlefields of Troy. as realistic representations of what their true form may have been. This approach has allowed us to expand the unit diversity by including unique warriors to the roster whilst adding an extra layer of tactical versatility to the conflict. And I don't really have any really good inclinations of what a lot of these mythological beasts might be. We look at stuff like Cyclops, we look at stuff like Cerberus, we look at things like the Hydra. There aren't a lot of things that I can think of that they would draw on for what their real interpretations might be. I've heard of different things for basilisks and the such, so it'll be interesting to see if we get stuff like Gorgons or like some of the more really far-fetched mythological creatures versus the stuff that might be a little bit more derivative. So only time will tell, and as we find out more, we can dive in on what those mythological creatures might possibly be. But how is battle different in Troy? So this is kind of interesting, and it mirrors what I was talking about earlier. This is an era that is very infantry-based. We're not dealing with a ton of cavalry. We're not dealing with like rows after rows and rows and after rows of archers. We're dealing with a lot of infantry because people like cavalry and people like and people like archers typically require a lot of training. And at the time, that wasn't super prevalent. It was prevalent to just have a large military infantry force. We don't get things like the wide use of chariots throughout the entirety of warfare for some time. I mean, Egyptians kind of had that on lock, right? So we get a lot of different stuff. Many new active and passive battle abilities fuel this dynamism. So we're going to get a lot of different things going on here, right? So like talking about elite heavy troops that are expert flankers and stuff like that. Looking at stuff like myrmidons and different types of infantry, hoplites and the such. So it should be interesting to see how this kind of fleshes itself out and how they really take advantage of the fact that you're dealing with a very not so diverse military unit like you get with Three Kingdoms, but hopefully with Troy, they can really spark up a lot of variance from unit to unit. And that was true in the Iliad. You had them kind of talking about stuff like the Myrmidons. Again, the Myrmidons are probably my favorite fighting force of the time, so I'm going to talk about them a lot. But to just kind of see how they will make these guys individualistic and different from the other forces of the Greek side or the other forces of the Trojan side. So it'll be very interesting to see how this kind of plays out. Which famous heroes will be featured? So it did say, 8 of the most prominent champions from both sides of the conflict, such as the Greek champion Achilles and the Prince of Troy himself, Hector, will be making an appearance. Like we were saying earlier, Menelaus, Agamemnon, Odysseus, and Paris will probably be included in this. So that brings our total up to 6, leaving us with 2 more slots of possible champions to kind of be funneled into this game. Will there be any dueling system? Now, this is a pretty interesting one here, right? So it's saying that there is not going to be the dueling system that we got in Three Kingdoms, but its own unique take on hero versus hero combat. So it's going to be a little bit different. It did say it's going to have awesome matched animations. In addition to that, they're not locked in. However, the mechanics are more free-form than Three Kingdoms lock-in duel mechanics. The heroes can be directed away from a challenge without penalty after the challenge effect has worn off. So this should be a pretty interesting way to kind of have duels going back and forth as they weave their way throughout combat. And it'll be interesting to see how combat itself plays its hand and how these lords or these heroes or these champions for what have you will use that combat. So do we have generals that are famous like an Agamemnon, who isn't necessarily some prominent, huge, amazing battle champion, and then do we have champions like Achilles? Like, is there going to be a difference? Do we have famous generals and then famous champions, or are the champions all going to be generals? I think that's what we're going to have to find out and how this really delineates. Now we're going to get champion classes like we had in Three Kingdoms, because Achilles would be a different type of champion than, say, again, Agamemnon. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of falls into place, and if champions and generals are going to be one and the same. What role did diplomacy play? So pretty much here it's going through taking inspiration from the Total War Three Kingdoms. Troy allows you to keep your allies sweet, your enemies in their place, and change the entire course of the Trojan War should you choose to. So you'll have a lot of freedom in your diplomatic relations. An economy will work very similar to what we get with Heroes of the Might and Magic, of Age of Empires, where you're not just simply working on strictly the income of your money. You're working on food, wood, stone, bronze, and gold. Food and wood are used to recruit early game units and construct simple buildings, but as the campaign progresses, more formidable structures will require stone, and higher tier units will require bronze. So it kind of has that very typical feel that we get when we progress through the standard RTS style of tier systems, where the higher you move up through your tiers, the more demanding the resources is on each one of those tiers. So it'll be interesting to see how that fleshes itself out. So before I got confirmation from Creative Assembly that they are using the Warhammer 2 engine, this little block of text made me think that they were using the Warhammer 2 engine. In addition, the campaign flyover kind of made me think so too, but there's little documentation of Trojan naval warfare, but we know how important it is to our players. As a result, we've used Total War Warhammer 2 Curse of the Vampire Coast as our main inspiration for the naval combat in Troy. When two fleets clash at sea, they will disembark on a nearby island and settle the score in a land battle. As hinted above, armies dedicated to Poseidon's favor will receive appropriate bonuses. So we won't get the typical kind of naval warfare that I think a lot of people want. At the same time, I'm okay with that. This is, again, the Trojan War, and I didn't hear very many tales of the massive Greek sea being stymied by a small elite guerrilla Trojan force of naval officers. Like, I never read that. That didn't exist. So I'm fine with it kind of being centered more around naval journeys, followed by big little conflicts on islands and actual naval combat. I'm fine with that. And pretty much this talks about using the artistry of the Hellenic era to inspire what actually is how the campaign map looks. We'll see how our unit cards look. I'm assuming they're going to be heavily stylized in that same kind of artistry that we get on vases or on mosaics and such. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this kind of fleshes out. I'm very, very excited. We do know that it's coming out in 2020. No specific date here. Hoping on the earlier portion of 2020 rather than the later. It seems that Creative Assembly likes to have kind of like a February, March, April timeline release planned. That's what they did for Three Kingdoms. Well, Three Kingdoms was a little bit later than that, but still, regardless, I think that's what we can come to expect from a release window for Total War Saga Troy, especially if we're expecting at least news of Total War Warhammer 3 by the end of next year. It would make a lot of sense that Troy comes to the fore quickly so they can move into production overhaul, I guess, whatever, for Total War Warhammer 3. But overall, guys, I am super stoked. I am just jazz hands over here. I cannot wait to find out more. I'm very excited that it is on the Warhammer 2 engine. I'm excited to see Achilles. I'm excited to see Odysseus, Hector, and I'm more than happy to dive into some of the, I guess, quote unquote, lore behind this, if you so wish. It's probably one of my favorite eras of history. I remember sitting in my 6th grade class, and I had a really, really good history teacher that was able to weave a very good story. He told the entire class the Trojan War. He didn't have us read the Iliad, and he didn't have us read it, every little like nuance of the war. He just told it by mouth in the same way that Homer did. And Homer was known for speaking around a campfire and using the word of mouth to kind of convey his grand epics and tales and sagas. And that's the kind of the same way that I learned it. So this has a very special place in my heart. So I'm really stoked to see this moving forward. If there's any questions you guys have or anything you want to talk about, anything like that, go ahead and let me know in the comments. Super stoked on it. Let's just talk about it all day. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.